So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel. My name is Canan Atılgan, and I'm the director of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung's London office. So I believe that some of you already know us, or at least heard about us, but for those who do not know us, we are a German political foundation closely associated with Germany's governing Christian Democratic Union Party. We currently run more than 100 offices across the world, one of which is our London office, where we've been active now for more than 40 years. And our mission is very simple: to encourage public debates, such as this one, to offer policy ideas on key issues that our societies face. And all of this in support of center-right and Christian democratic values we largely share with our British conservative friends. So we are very happy to co-host this panel together with Onward, and it's a real pleasure to see such a distinguished panel of speakers to address one of the pressing questions for our political family: how to win back young voters. And I think we are all too aware that young generations have been turning away from the political center and towards the extremes. The CDU in recent years has been struggling to connect with young people, and the average age of our members has now reached 60 plus. I think we are even around 64. Mm-hmm. So I think the situation in the UK is no different, so it's a common challenge. So we want to find answer to the questions: why is this, and what can we do about it? And therefore, we partnered with Onward for a major poll among young people in the UK, which the results of which we are going to present and discuss with you. I don't want to take too much away at this stage, but let me just say it is serious. It is not hopeless, but it is serious. And this should encourage us to work hard to rebuild the trust of young generations in the center-right. So let's now hear the findings of the poll and then open up for discussion.
Great, thank you for that introduction. I'm James Johnson, the co-founder of the polling firm JL Partners, and we've worked with Onward on this poll. And I was going to say conservatives in this room look away now, but that might detract slightly from the purpose of the event. So what we've done is done a poll of young people. We've done, we did focus groups too, but we did a poll at the bottom there of a representative sample of 5,000 16 to 40-year-olds in Great Britain, and we ran that at the end of August going into the start of September, so still relatively fresh, and that is representative of that age group. That is the important thing. So often in cross breaks of polls you see the younger groups, but they're not necessarily representative. This is a representative sample, and we also did some focus groups with younger people within that group, and we split it between 16 to 28-year-olds and also some of 29 to 40-year-olds as well, and we're going to refer to those throughout: Gen Z and also millennials. So let's have a look at what it looks like. Well, we asked them first that classic voting intention poll question: how would you vote if there was a general election tomorrow? And well, it's quite hard to find the Conservatives on that graph, I have to say. Millennials, Labour leading by 33%, Reform in second place on 20%. The Conservatives tie for third place with the Liberal Democrats. And Gen Z, that younger group, 16 to 28-year-olds, obviously who are going to be able to vote, the younger side of that, who are going to be able to vote at the next election. Labour first place, but very closely followed by Reform on 23%. And you really have to get down to 10% to find the Conservatives, who are behind the proportion who say they wouldn't vote, and also behind the Greens and tied with the Lib Dems. So clearly not a good picture for the Conservatives. You can see this new polarisation of political preference between Labour and Reform for both of those groups vying for first place. Now, this is a really interesting one. We often get this sort of narrative out there that do people, as they become older, as they age, do they become more conservative? Now, we haven't got enough data here to say that for sure. We would need longitudinal studies. We can't quite look into the future. But what we can do is look at these key life milestones that people in our poll go through. And we've counted these life milestones, which you can see them numbered at the bottom there. Number 1 is if you have a job. Number 2 is if you own a home. Number 3 is if you live with a spouse or partner. Number 4 is being married. Number 5 is having children. I think Tom Dugan ticks all 5 of those.
I do, yeah. Still, despite everything.
I think I've managed 1. And what you see here is, as you go through those life milestones, how do the parties perform? Well, actually, that dark blue line, which is the Conservative line, in terms of the margin of error, it stays completely flat, whereas, and actually, Labour goes up the more that somebody experiences those things. And the focus groups show us that basically as people get more of these milestones, they get more exposed to cost, or the cost of childcare, or the cost of a home, they actually tend to become more likely to choose left-wing parties who they see as directly supporting with those costs. Now, perhaps the experience of Labour in government may change that, but at the moment it is the left who are seen as answering those questions. An extreme version of this, by the way, is happening in New York, where the mayoral race there, Zoran Mamdani, socialist candidate, people are opting for him because they feel like he has the solutions to pressures on housing, pressures on childcare. Similar thing happening here. So that old adage of the more life milestones, the more conservative you become, that link has been broken with current younger voters. And some more cheery news for you. Those young people also do not think that working hard pays off. They disagree that if you work hard and play by the rules, you'll go far in life. Only 30% of voters agree with that statement, which is the 1 and 2 score here. And they also feel that a significant amount would consider emigrating, 1 in 3. And we've seen that in a lot of our focus groups, especially with more affluent voters, people starting to say, I'd rather live anywhere but the UK. So there is a real sort of breakdown in that sort of sense that the UK pays back for those younger people. And we've heard it a lot. What about being able to buy your own home? Well, basically, people do not feel that they are easily able to get a house. Only about 1 in 4 of that group say that they expect to be able to buy a house in the next few years. It's a little bit larger when you make it 5 to 10 years, but around half are saying that they don't think they'll ever be able to buy a house, or that it will take more than 10 years to do so. And those that don't say they don't receive financial support from parents are even more likely to say that they don't expect that to happen anytime soon. Goodness, this is quite the Grim Reaper presentation, isn't it? We also asked them, how well do you think democracy works in the UK today? Only 8% of that group thinks that democracy in the UK works very well. When you add in those who say it's fairly well, it still comes at fewer than half, only just over 4 in 10. So a real sense of frustration there. It's not completely dead. You know, only 1 in 5 say that democracy in the UK is completely broken. But clearly, this dissatisfaction with government and the mainstream political parties is also feeding through to dissatisfaction with democracy. I know that Onward have also had some excellent work on this, showing the number of young people who would back a sort of strongman / dictator figure if it meant things changing. So, you know, the threat amongst young people on democracy is very real indeed. So let me try and put a more productive face on. What do we do next? And Onward have identified through this polling 3 sort of key principles. The first is competence. People, now this is you know, we've gone searching for the good news for the Conservatives here, and this is interesting that almost half of this group of younger people, I remember this is 16 to 40-year-olds, feel that are ready to say the Conservatives have some of the right ideas, good news, but they also say that they're too incompetent to carry them out successfully. Less good news. Now, that is interesting because it shows that actually relatively few young people, compared to that, feel that the Conservatives just have the completely wrong ideas. And actually, when you add up the percentage that say they have the right ideas and would run the country well, and those who say they have the right ideas and would run it incompetently, it's actually a majority of people. So there's not this complete dissonance between the young people and the ideas of the Conservative Party. It's that they feel that the Conservative Party can't make it happen. So competence is absolutely key. Really interesting in the focus groups, younger people that defected from the Conservatives to the Lib Dems at the last election, they were not talking about whether the Conservatives had gone too far right or whether the Conservatives backed Leave in the referendum. They were saying, actually, I just don't trust the Conservatives to be able to get things done. The last 14 years were a complete shower. So competence is crucial. Also, the priorities that the Conservatives care about need to match those of the public. What we've done here is we've charted various issues on a graph. Anything higher up, they're more likely to think the Conservatives care about, and anything further to the right are issues that they care about themselves. So what you're really looking for here for a winning sort of formula is to have sort of the key issues sort of higher up and onto the right-hand side. But you can see that although they think the Conservatives do care about Ukraine, crime, taxes, even to some extent pensions and education, they are less likely to prioritise those themselves. And actually the number one issue that voters really care about, that they feel that the Conservatives care about less, the cost of living. Absolutely crucial thing where they do not feel that Conservatives have the answer. Housing and immigration are also in there as key areas where the Conservatives are slightly unhinged from where younger people think. Remember, immigration, absolutely key for these young people, as well as cost of living and housing. This is when we look at, okay, how are Labour perceived versus the Conservatives on these key issues that we've seen. Now, again, what we've done here is on the y-axis is anything that Labour leads the Conservatives on. Anything below that line in the middle is issues that Conservatives lead Labour on amongst this young group. Now, we will see that there is no issue that these young people believe that Conservatives are better on than Labour. Immigration is the only one that comes close, but they narrowly prefer Labour on that metric. And you can see on those really important issues on the right-hand side, housing, cost of living, Labour has quite a decisive advantage. When you look at reform versus the Conservatives with these younger people, it's a bit more winnable for the Conservatives. The Conservatives do lead on climate, on Gaza, on health, on Ukraine, on education. But again, look at the really important issues. Cost of living, reform are narrowly seen, and you almost sort of miss it on the graph because it's so high up. Look at immigration. Significant salience to these young voters, and they overwhelmingly, by a margin of 40 points, think that reform has the lead over the Conservatives on that issue. So clearly a lot of work for the Conservatives to do with young people. And the final sort of principle after competence and priorities is distinctiveness. Look at this. When we ask people what are the main reasons not to vote for the Conservative Party, when we ask these young people, significant numbers say I don't like their ideas or policies, they don't listen to people like me, they're just more of the same. But when you narrow it down to the winnable young people for the Conservatives, which is that middle chart, the top answer is they're just more of the same. And this is a really interesting learning, I think, for the Conservatives. They can't just be continuity in terms of what's out there now, or in terms of what they were in government. They need to look strikingly different from what came before, and that's certainly a key learning from this poll for younger people, but also in other research across the country as a whole. The Conservatives very much need to be that change candidate, both compared to Labour, but also compared to what came before in government, if they want to appeal to these people. So that is the overview of that JLP Onward and Konrad Foundation research, and yeah, hand back to you, Phoebe.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you, Chana. I'm Phoebe. I'm going to be chairing the rest of this event. I'm head of renewing our social contract at Onward. So I'm going to go to each of our panellists, who I will introduce in a moment. Now, they had been told they'd have 5 minutes each, but I'm actually going to cut that down to a very brisk 3 minutes, because I think we're going to have lots of questions, and I think it'd be quite good to get into that as soon as possible. Then I will have some questions for our panellists before I open things up to the floor. So we have with us, to my left, Tom Tugendhat. Tom is Member of Parliament for Tonbridge and previously served as Security Minister. He was also chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. To my right, I have Kai Whittaker. So Kai is a German politician from the CDU, and he served as a member of the Bundestag since 2013. Over here, we have Lara Brown. Lara is commissioning editor at The Spectator. And here is Chris Worrell, industry fellow at Onward, previously founder of Labour Yimby before defecting to the Conservatives.
Sensible fellow.
We've still got it. Tom, can I start with you for your 3 minutes, please?
Sure. I'm going to challenge the opening premise that people are drifting away from the centre. They're not drifting away from the centre. They're drifting away from what doesn't work and what won't work for them. This is a logical series of outcomes for an economic system that has effectively become a Ponzi system for the old. That's what people are choosing against, and that is the revolution that we're seeing in politics. Because the truth is, the UK, and in fact the European economy as a whole, has become like one of those closed pension systems where you can't invest into it. So you get to a point, right at the beginning, where you start paying in. And it starts to invest in things, companies, young people, ideas, hope, the future. But after a while, people age. And so they start to shift their pension plan. They start to shift it out of equities and into bonds. They start to shift it out of high growth and the future into stability, into the returns that you want if you don't want to take too much risk. Well, that's what Europe has done. Actually, the worst country in Europe for that is us, but other European countries have done it too. And young people are looking at this and realizing that an entire economy is now geared to a bunch of people who are aging and claiming their retirement. And guess what? It doesn't work. It doesn't work because they're protecting established assets over future growth. Now, you can see it in various different ways. You can see the way that we, for example, and here's my first live wire of the afternoon, we are still defending the triple lock, when it is simply not sustainable over the next 20 or 30 years in a way that means that it's in any way applicable to anybody under the age of 50. You can see it in the way that other parties are religious about preventing any building, defending an established asset class against a future asset class. You can see it in the way that Labour's jobs bill is designed specifically to protect those over the age of 40 who've got jobs, not young people who want them. It is a continuous series of politics in the centre that is defending, in this case, the haves, the have assets, have jobs, have equity, against the have-nots, young people. And guess what? They worked it out. Because young people aren't stupid. They may be busy, they may be distracted, but they're not stupid. They can see the way the economy is going. Everybody else can see the way the economy is going. And they are choosing parties that are revolutionising that. And so we've got to get out of this European Ponzi scheme. And we've got to start looking at economies that do actually invest in the future. And that's where we've got to make a radical transition from dead money to live money. Now, dead money is the kind of money that sits in bricks, sits in bonds, doesn't hire anybody, and just accumulates assets to itself. Live money is the kind of money that hires people in this room, supports ideas, innovation, and so on. And if we don't get from dead money to live money, we're in real trouble. Now, this isn't the first time we've been through this trouble. If you would like a very long lecture, I will be talking about the Statute of Mortmain from the 1270s afterwards, and how Edward I reformed the economy of England, but that is a separate question, but it's connected. But we need to get away from democracy as demography, and that's where we are now. That's why democracy is seen not to be working, because it is quite literally tracking demographic interests of a retiring generation, and we need to break away from that. And when we say cost of living and why people are focused on it, it's not cost of living in the sense of inflation, although that matters. It's not cost of living in the sense of property values, although that's part of it. It's cost of living in the sense that we've had effectively almost no growth over many years, not just in the UK but across Europe, and that means that established assets are going up in value compared to future value. And so what we're seeing there is cost of living is an indicator for no growth. If we want growth, you need to invest, and that is the mistake that we have not fixed since the late 1990s.
Thank you, Tom. Hi, could I please go to you next?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much for the invitation. Great to be here. Now, I believe politics is easy. And when we ask ourselves the question why young voters are not voting Conservative anymore, I think the answer is simple. Because we don't care enough about them. That's my proposition, so to speak, for today. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if you look at what happened, at least in Germany, I'm pretty much sure it probably is the same here in the UK. We lost the young men more or less to the far right, and we lost the women more to the left parties. And it has to do with what troubles the young voters. If you look at the last 10 years, the young generation went through the still ongoing migration crisis. They went through COVID. They went through the cost of living crisis caused by the Ukrainian or by the Russian war in Ukraine. So now they've been through 10 years of constant crisis, and they don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. And both genders have a different approach to how to solve that politically. And the far right, I must say, is quite clever in at least catching the young men, although they now also increasingly get the young women, because of because of the following reason, I think. How should I say it? The far right, the far left. The far left manages to criticize male role models. They talk about toxic masculinity. They talk about how it is more or less shameful to be a man, whereas the far right tries to trumpet a little bit. Andrew Tate, I'm not sure if that is I think he's quite famous in this room as well, or popular, not popular, but famous. He's the sort of role model for this new kind of masculinity, to be a breadwinner, to be a strong man, etc., etc. We have German politicians on the AfD now giving dating tips on Instagram, how to get girls. Now, I would never take an advice on dating tips from a politician, but here you go. And the same goes for the left, and we've seen some results here as well. We saw the question about do we care about family, the cost of raising a family, especially for well-trained women. That is, I mean, a real trade-off they have to make. And does it pay out to play fair? And given if we remember the banking crisis in the early 2000s, we bailed out bank after bank, and all the managers who were responsible for doing that, they didn't get their fair share of kick in the ass. They were saved by the taxpayer. So we taught our young generation that it doesn't pay off to play by the rules. So now that's where we are, and I think we have to implement a new kind of policy. That's where I agree with the studies that we have to remodel, or change ourselves, but we must do it with values. There was one conclusion in the study where it said, don't talk about values because they are more left-leaning in the younger generation. Now, I don't believe that you can implement policies without having an underlying principle or value, because otherwise it becomes hollow. You must have those values, but they are there. Young people want to work and belong to a community. They still want that. We can give it to them because we are the party of communities and families. They want respect for effort. They want to move up the ladder and not face a wall. So we have to remove the walls. And they want the recognition to get a family and live this very traditional life, which I should be up cheering for us. But we have to talk about what matters. Because there are things where we are not talking about, at least in Germany that's true, I'm not sure if it's in Britain, but if you look at inmates, imprisoned people, over 90% men. If you look at school dropouts, over 60% men. If you look at drug addicts, over 60% men. If you look at suicide rates, it's over 70% men. So all these topics are men topics, but we are not discussing this in our social policies, and we have to do that. We must be more interested in what these topics are for the young people. Then they will come back to the voting booth and vote for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai. Lara.
Hi, thank you. I think the reason I really like this polling is that it's looking at young people up to the age of 40. I think we shouldn't be wildly concerned that people under the age of 30 abandon centrist parties like the Conservatives or even Labour with the move to the Greens and Reform at the moment. That's very normal. But the fact that people are not at the point they become stakeholders in society, that they move on to higher incomes and they start looking at family acquisition and home ownership, they're not coming back to the Conservatives. I think that's where you find yourself in a sort of series of profound decline, and it's that 10-year group that I think the Conservatives should really be focusing on and worried about. I agree with a lot of what Tom said. The reason people have left the centre-right is not that they've been radicalised on TikTok by Nigel Farage or that they're all sort of very unsensible. Is that they've recognised that they've grown up in a state that is fundamentally extracted from sort of their assets and their wealth. If you grow up in the British state today, the main thing that you get from the taxpayer, assuming you're not on benefits, is a university education, which you'll probably not pay back because of low income, but which won't be very useful to you and you won't be very grateful for. And then after that point, you are earning money to fund the triple lock, to fund the winter fuel payment, to fund free bus passes for pensioners, and to pump money into a group for whom 1 in 5 are millionaires, while things like home ownership and family formation seem impossible to you, and while those milestones consistently move backwards. And a lot of attempts I've seen from parties of both sides in the last 5 years to get young people back have focused not on this fundamental imbalance and the fact that you are funding a state pension that you will almost definitely never receive, because no economist worth their soul believes that the triple lock is sustainable to get millennials to a point where they will ever have it paid out. It is, as Tom said, it's a Ponzi scheme, and people are becoming more and more aware of that. There is nothing to wait for. It is just money being spent on a health service that they don't use, that again is having to focus all of its energy on pensioners. As the state extracts, suddenly you're off with these random gimmicks. I think a lot of the leaning into progressivism that you saw in the early 2020s was an attempt to find something that was cost-free and very, very easy to give young people and offer them that, rather than focusing on cost of living and wealth and asset ownership, which people really care about. But my last point is, because economic decline has been so sharp, and because we've seen for the first time, as growth basically stalls, a change in the promise that if you work hard, you'll be better off than the generation before you because society has moved on and the economy has grown. Because that is over, there's been a sort of flattening of aspiration. And that means you don't really need any more policies targeted very specially at young people. Everybody is struggling to purchase property. The average age of ownership is moving up and up and up and could even leave this sample size. Everybody is struggling with childcare costs. Childcare costs are downstream of very, very high energy costs. Everyone is suffering because we haven't done planning reform, which means that businesses can't survive. Everyone is suffering because we tax business in a very, very strange way, which means that employing someone is something that businesses don't want to do and want to avoid at all costs. So we're now at a point where, because the situation is so bad, sensible and normal economic policy, focusing on the really big and obvious issues that everyone in the policy world seems to be aware of, will benefit young people. And if you can convince young people you're going to solve those issues, you can help them and support them and improve their lives and allow them to do things like get married and have children without having to steer your entire ship towards the concept of the young voter versus the old or something. And I think that is effectively what has to happen now to win any young people back, and you have to signal the confidence that you could do that.
Thank you very much, Lara. Chris.
Thanks. I'll give a bit of background to myself, just to sort of put some context around the Labour move to the Conservative. When I grew up in northwest London, I lived next to the Kodak factory and Windsor and Newton, which was a paint factory. And I drank as I got older. I left school at 16, no GCSEs, rejected from A-levels, and went to work as a mechanic and in a betting shop. We used to drink in the Wilston Working Men's Club opposite a new mosque that was built. And what happened at that point, I mean, this is going back to the deindustrialisation piece, the Kodak factory, where all my mates' parents and a lot of my mates worked, moved to Brazil. The paint factory moved to France. And we were in an area where effectively it was hollowed out. And all we had a community though. We had about 20 or 30, mostly white and black, working class, normal people. The mosque was built outside. It was Lee Rigby's killer actually spoke outside that mosque when there was my mate's dad's 60th birthday where the DJ was delayed for 3 hours. But the point to that story is, you know, the community had changed. In North West London in Harrow was the most diverse borough in London at that time, and it's obviously changed a lot since then. There's only one of those mates that's still in that area that we grew up, and that's the one that lives with his sister who was taken into psychiatric care and had to look after his niece. So what's the relevance today? When you look at the parties, why did I leave Labour? Labour is no longer the party for ordinary working people. It's if you look at the polling, people that are more affluent, and you can see it in the party. I chaired the Labour Party in Tower Hamlets. I was a British Army reservist. I'm a property developer. I ended up going to get to Cambridge for a further education college with hardship bursary maintenance grants, right? And that was under Tony Blair, and hence why was I in Labour? My dad was a Labour man, but my mum was not. And when you look back on it and you see this, you work hard to get a party elected that then backtracks and looks down their nose at people that might want to put a flag up. I do find it a bit odd that we have our own country where apparently our own flag is racist. And I just find it insane that, mostly these progressive middle-class types that have never, had a struggle in their life, looking down their nose at these people that, are proud of their country are thick or stupid. Now, the Conservatives, I don't blame the Conservatives for as much as people would like to. I think they need to, if I wasn't having one criticism, it's to stop apologising. There was COVID, there was a Russia invaded Ukraine, there was a number of these things. The Independent Bank of England printed loads of money, there was some decisions around that, but it's an independent bank. And that is, and a pandemic on top of all of that. So let's just kind of accept that there was some macro conditions that made it very difficult, but they still got down inflation to 2% before Labour got in. So, but moving forward, when we talk about the youth alienation and the rise of reform, I'm conscious that I've got about 30 seconds left, so I'll wrap it up on this for questions. When you look at the rise of reform, people are just, it's about fairness, right? They don't feel like it's fair. I think Lara and Kai and Tom have touched on all of this, including PIP. Why did I leave Labour? Because they wouldn't cut the benefits to fund defence. We've got, the Institute of Fiscal Studies have shown the health-related benefits is flying up, but yet our disability and long-term sickness is the same compared to comparable countries. And if they can't make those decisions over and over again, and on planning reform, and I'll come on to the YIMBY movement when we go into the questions, but if we cut down, but there is a way forward to do this, and it is through planning reform, as I was touching on, Phoebe's touched on. It is through the family work that, I've now tick all of those milestone boxes, and I'm getting crushed by childcare fees, and my wife, she would like to look after the kid, but she's only got 6 weeks mat leave for up to the 3 years, but we can't afford to go back, and we can't afford to have another kid. And when you do look to end on this point on the fairness to a lot of the members that I was dealing with in Tower Hamlets Labour Party, there are a lot of people that spend a lot of their time not doing that. Where some communities there are 60% of women that don't work, and that there are lots of children who don't necessarily go on to go to tax-paying roles. So I'll leave it there, and maybe we'll touch on some of the housing bit.
Thank you, Chris. I have a question for you, Tom. So we're coming out of a very strange time in history where, because we've had such a massive generation, right, the product of the baby boom, called boomers, and I don't mean that in any derogatory sense at all, it's been possible to be elected really just by winning the support of this one cohort of people, right? You can build a political mandate just from this one generation, and that is what successive governments have done. And this explains a lot of the problems and the policies that you were talking about. For example, the triple lock is introduced just as people in that cohort are reaching retirement age. But now this is going to change, right? Because millennials have now overtaken boomers as the single biggest generational group in the UK. So you have to introduce a huge amount of volatility, and it's doing that. To what extent is that this like very, very major generational shift, this sort of demographic shift, is that discussed, do you think, as a cause of various problems that face the Conservative Party?
Well, not nearly enough. I mean, the reality is people sort of complain about democracy, but democracy is just demographics. That's all it is, right? I mean, it's just, you know, I'm reminded of the elections one used to see in Northern Ireland, where it's just basically a head count. Which side of the line are you on? Well, the truth is that's what democracy is writ large. All it is a head count, and it's a head count of what are your interests, what are your aspirations, what are your hopes. And as that changes, you're right, this is going to be revolutionary, because what we've seen effectively, to your point of demographics, it's not just that we've seen the government deciding certain things. You know, we're in a country of free people choosing freely to do things of their own volition. So just at the same time as the government stopped investing in 1997, roughly at the same time as Labour came in, you saw a massive drop-off, incremental, okay, but a massive drop-off starting in 1997, continuing to today. That was the government encouraged one. Well, guess what? There was a private one at exactly the same time. Why? Because, as you say, an ageing population tends to act in its own interests. And so what we've got to do is we've got to make sure that we run the conversation that needs to be had, because actually nobody wants their grandparent to be left, you know, broken and alone and without support. And grandparents don't want their grandchildren to be left without a future and without hope. So the job of politicians has got to be to tie generations together. Now, that's what pensions used to do. That's what governments used to do. They effectively, a good government gave the perspective of time to a generation that otherwise only counted in its own lifetime. Now, that is a remarkable thing to do, to give people a future, to give people an image of their own community, their own self beyond their own lifespan. And I'm afraid, as we have got more and more transactional as politicians and as electors, we have forgotten that actually the point of time is what matters. Get that right. If you invest into the future, you get growth in your years. If you don't, you end up seeing growth falling off, cost of living crisis, and the demographic problems that we've got.
Thank you, Tom. Kai, we were chatting about this briefly before we began the panel. I'd also like to get Chris's opinion on this too. I've lost count of the number of times I've tried to speak to, not necessarily Conservative MPs, but people around the Conservatives where I've read this in speeches. You know, the Conservatives stand for pragmatism. You know, it's all about being pragmatic. But there's, you know, you're talking about values. I mean, it can be quite difficult to really understand what is meant by that. And often, I think anyway, like pragmatism has sometimes stood for kind of shorthand for a very, very slow move to the left. I'd like to know if you think that's been a problem for the centre-right in Germany. And then I'd like Chris's view on that dynamic from the perspective of someone who's been, member, part of the Labour Party. How has that looked to you from, a Labour Party does talk about its values. What's it been like to sort of look across the aisle and see this group of people who go, we don't believe in anything, we're pragmatic? Kai, can I come to you first?
Yeah, I mean, I just said that implementing policies without values is just hollow and will not take you very far in politics. And I want to use Tom's example to make the point. I mean, we all, across Europe, we are talking about aging demographics and how they stress the pension system. We have the same discussion in Germany. But it is a bit of a dangerous path for Conservatives to go down that road playing the demographics policies. Why? Because we are valuing family values. Now, each child, each young member of the society is a grandchild to someone, and not every old person, but many of them are grandparents to someone. And they want to look after each other and make sure that both have a fair share of the economic output the country produces. So I think it is difficult to tap into this kind of argument, and we saw it actually in our last election earlier this year, that all these social policies like topping up more pension, we had, I mean, our Bavarian sister party, they put up another increase on the, we call it mother pension. It's a special top-up if you, as a woman, gave birth to children. And we introduced an early start pension, or promised to introduce one, so when a child is born, we want to put some money into a fund to use the early years for interest. Well, both did not play any role in the election and didn't change or swing the voter. So I do not quite see in practice that an old generation is trying to get most out of the GDP for them. So we have to, I think very carefully about what are our values. In this case, it's family values, it's community values, and then try to make sure that we align them. So we should probably talk about more the safety of the pension system in the future, rather than of the financial credibility of the pension system, rather than saying we need to cut costs. That's a management approach we should leave to, in this case, Nigel Farage.
Yeah, look, I think on the values thing, I think we're going through a political realignment, okay? And we've seen in America how they've pivoted away from their traditional voter base. And we're seeing the battle now where people are either keeping the triple lock or sort of, promising winter fuel allowance after they promised to cut it, and removing two-child benefit cap. There is, we're at 100% debt to GDP and 37% tax to GDP. It's high since 1946. And part of why I came across to the Conservatives and more importantly with Onward was people like Simon Clarke here, who was a principal man and had fought, in the Parliament for more housing and understood the evidence-backed research that needs to inform policy and positions. And we know that there is, supply and demand factors, predominantly an acute shortage of land that's got permission, as well as a number of sort of tax issues that are sort of crushing sales moving forward, and how that affects the development market. And there's a lot of work going on to that. But when it comes to the pragmatism, I mean, it can either mean two things. It can either mean compromise, or it can either mean going where the public is. Now, I would say in the past there's been some compromise, and part of the reason why I left the Labour Party was they'd capitulated to the campaign to protect rural England on their planning and infrastructure bill. But more importantly, I would also say, we can talk down people that say that Tory party shouldn't ape reform. I think the argument's reductive. You've seen from the polling today, even the young people have taken umbrage with immigration. But it goes beyond that. When we're talking about the values, it's how do we integrate the community aspect, but culturally, are we is it an integrated society? I mean, the Island of Strangers comment, again, another part that Keir Starmer said that you turned on, that I actually felt quite strongly about, where if you don't know your neighbour, you don't know the people on your street, and you can't, if you've got some issues, I chaired a resident association of 1,000 units, for my sins, but I met a lot of different people, and part of the housing crisis, and I end on this point, is it doesn't matter what background you're from. I've been knocked on doors that were look for Rahman voters, right? Didn't matter. They had 2 mattresses up on the wall, and asked who was sleeping there, it was the kids. And despite their political differences, we'd still try and sort of work together to do that. And I think it's just getting back to that point where we can look beyond, politics or religion or race, and getting it back to something. And I think the political realignment on this last point is going to come from, reindustrialisation, reshoring, looking at things like how can we bring energy prices down, because that affects the cost of living, and ultimately things like housing, which if we don't get that, you're not going to be able to pass that, make the next generation better off than the one before, which I think we've lost.
Thank you, Chris. Tom, we wanted to come in on this for a minute.
It's just very briefly, when people talk about values, I think it can be summarised in a very short sentence. Whose side are you on? That's what values are. Whose side are you on? Are you on the side of people who, are investing for the future, who are working in your society, who are, having jobs? Are you on the side of people who are taking out or putting in? Are you on the side of people who are in your country or various international ideals that you wish to look good and feel good about? Values is frankly just a question, whose side are you on? And we need to remember that.
Lara, we are both young Conservative women. Spectator's not an ambivalent employer, so I think... Do you think that they're potentially... If you're our age, right, and you go on Instagram and you see what people who we went to school with are posting about people of our age group, people who are even a bit older than us, and when they talk about the Conservatives, it can be incredibly negative, right? And you'll see things like the Conservatives want to kill all disabled people. That's something I've seen a lot.
Well,
yeah, no, that's a good point. But I do think, and you don't have never kissed a Tory. There's no Labour equivalent of that, right? There's no Labour equivalent of never kissed a Tory, sadly. Do you think that this is actually quite a small group of people who do and say this stuff? Because not that many people are politically engaged. That toxicity doesn't come through in our polling, actually. Do you think it's kind of led to sort of an atmosphere of fatalism around the chances of ever winning back young people for Conservatives, which has sort of become a bit self-fulfilling? Or is that a bit of cope from me?
I think something that the Conservatives should be able to take comfort from is the fact that almost every election since the 1970s, polling has predicted them to do slightly worse than they've done, because people are far more likely to be embarrassed to be a Conservative voter than to be a Labour voter. I think Reform might modify that a bit, because I imagine people also don't love taking polls, they're going to vote Reform. But it's a feature of conservatism, I think, because they're associated with tough decisions and maybe cutting benefits and reducing taxes. It can be viewed as quite a selfish vote. And therefore, what you see is a very, very large, this is not what I'm saying is happening now, this is historical. You often see a very large majority of people who think the Tories have the solutions and a very small number of activists who are dominating the airwaves with the criticism. I don't know really, outside of working in this world, no one I went to school with is a right-wing activist. Nobody is posting about the importance of getting people off PIP. It's not fun, it's not sexy, it's not cool. But I have lots of friends, and I know lots of people who are posting about how evil the Conservatives are, but they never show up in polling numbers, so they are quite small. And I think one of the problems actually with that group is that group has influenced Conservative policy for a very long time. A lot of MPs I meet are very upset about a small group thinking they're nasty. And there's been a really big effort, and I think that was what the progressive drift, from Theresa May to losing the election, followed. It's people just wanted to be the nice guy for once. They wanted to have one fun policy, and they wanted to make one nice decision that wasn't difficult. So I'm not saying that everything's fine and there's millions and millions of secret Conservative voters out there, and we should ignore the criticism. But I think if the Conservatives are going to choose an issue to focus on, it's not vitriolic hatred. I think you can ignore that. That's always existed. It's people who have forgotten that we exist. There's no protests outside this conference. I mean, people just don't care about the Tories anymore, and that is an issue. And it's people who think they're incompetent. And you have to fix those two things, but you probably get to ignore vitriolic hatred for now.
I've got one final question before we open up to the floor, and it's a question for you again, Laura. As the youngest person on this panel, are you impressed by the policy announcement today, to give young people who get their first job £5,000 towards their first home, or not?
It feels slightly 1980s, this policy. It feels like we're operating in a world where you buy your first house very shortly after getting your first job. And it feels like it comes from a party that's lost sense of the fact that you can work full-time for over 10 years and find a partner who's done the same. And unless you were in the top 30% of people trying to purchase capital property, or you're in a part of the country where house prices are lower, you're going to really struggle. The positive is that the country is recognising that you need to offer something to first-time buyers, and I like that. £5,000 is nothing on the housing market, and it's going to be a dead £5,000 because the government doesn't seem to have any investment plans for it. It's just going to sit somewhere in a bank account and barely top up a deposit. So I'm not excited at all. I won't lie.
I think Tom has a view.
My only view is I'm in favour of tax cuts, and I'm in favour of the way Mel has gone around explaining it. I'm not quite sure why it has to be tied to one asset class. Why does it have to be tied to dead money? Why can't you choose what you do with it?
Yeah, buy a car.
Buy a car might get you a better job, might get you more. It's anything.
Indeed, yeah.
Young people know what they need.
Exactly.
It's this continuing refusal to believe that.
Questions. Bree, can I go to you first?
Be nice.
Hello, Tom. This will be a nice question. Aubrey Allegretti from The Times. Obviously, very interested to hear what you were saying about the triple lock, because it seems you're very out of kilter with, the leadership of the party and probably.
I'm not in the shadow cabinet. You may have noticed.
No, of course. the majority of Conservative MPs. What sort of system would you like to see it replaced with? Because that's the sort of natural question that follows. And I suppose more broadly, do you feel naturally at home still in the Conservative Party? And considering the title of this event is Winning Back Tomorrow, do you think that strategy is an election-winning strategy?
Yes, I do. I mean, frankly, I'll quote the great Conservative who seems to have some sort of an homage going on over there, the great lady, in that the facts of life are Conservative. And the facts of life are true. I mean, you don't have to take my word for it. Look at all those people who are leaving the country right now, who are going to Italy and to the United Arab Emirates. That's the 1% that pays 30% of the income tax that are on the planes that are leaving the country. You think Rachel's got a problem for this November? Wait till next November when the tax receipts come in March, and she sees that she isn't just got a, whatever it is, 10, 20, 30 billion pound black hole, but it's a 200-300 billion because the people who paid the tax have left the country. So the facts of life are Conservative, and the facts of life, I'm afraid, are pretty clear, which is that if you are under 40, you are not going to get this pension, you're not going to get the bus pass, you're not going to get the, and you can, if you like, you can pretend, you can lie to people, you can say to 18 to 30-year-olds, look, pay your money and your due course will come to you. But it's not true. And things that are not true, just simply not true, you can't hide them for very long. And the reason why people are voting as they're voting, or saying they're going to vote as they're going to vote, is because they've looked at this and they're not stupid. And they can see it's not true and they know it's not true. And why the hell would you pay into a Ponzi scheme when you can see Mr. Ponzi running away with your cash?
More questions. This gentleman here with the glasses on.
Thank you. I'm the chairman of Keele University Young Conservatives, and at last week's Freshers' Fair, we managed to gain more members than we had for the past 10 years. We're up to 11 members now from just under. And we are the biggest and only party on campus. So my question to the panel is, what more can Conservative societies do on campus to attract those freshers which are coming in every year to our societies and to our party?
Free beer and pizza.
Laura, as the one among us closest to university.
It's very tricky being a Conservative at university, and that's something that you have to accept, is out of your control. Most people do their sort of encampment building or sort of progressive activism at university, and that will be very difficult. And there, I think the best thing you can therefore do is be a sort of shiny, acceptable face. My university, Conservatives, had a sort of long, storied history of doing terrible things. And then being kicked out of the party, etc., and that made it very hard to attract people. So sort of, I think, be nice, be palatable, and accept that numbers might remain lower for a while. And host, I would say, do things with other societies in collaboration, host interesting debates. I think try and have a lot of events that don't require membership to come to and sort of prove you're interesting and fun.
Thank you, Laura. Any more questions? Yes, this gentleman.
Hello, Bill Balkett from The Standard. I'm also writing a book about youth support for the Conservative Party. There was quite an interesting talk earlier by Next Gen Tories, and they just did some polling of Onward. It showed only 38% of young people think the Tory party are bold enough to make bold decisions. And Andrew Griffith interestingly said, still in early stages of opposition, you just need time. So my question is, given the theme of the talk about winning back tomorrow, if 2029 is maybe just damage control, when are we expecting to see this renewal in the Conservative Party where they can see themselves back in government?
What do you think, Tom?
Well, it's a matter of choice, isn't it? I think that there is a very great chance that within the next 2 years, sadly, Labour's economic policies, refusal to live within our national fiscal straitjacket, will mean that we're going to have a financial crisis. I suspect it'll be a tax crisis, which leads to some very radical spending decisions. My guess is sometime between the next 12 and 24 months, so not for about a year, but then we'll start to hit it. And if we have done the work, which shows that we're honest, that we're willing to make reasonable cuts in the kind of spending that the government has to make, but making them in a way that defends our future, so protects our ability to invest in our economy and so on, then we'll come out of this as the party that's the only one with the right answers. You know, if, however, we're in a position where we're just going to salami slice like everybody else, or promise on the never never like other parties who claim to be of the right, then we're going to find ourselves living in cloud cuckoo land. I mean, look, just look at the pattern of investment since 1997. Like, just look at it. We haven't built a damn thing. We built one stretch of motorway, and that's the M6 toll. We built no train lines, no power stations, no motorways, and we're surprised that having not invested for 24 years, you don't get a return. Wow. You know, I mean, that's not rocket science, right? I mean, it's obvious. And yet that is the reality. So if we have done the work to maintain investment but to cut welfare, then people will see that we're the only serious party. If we haven't, then we won't.
Thank you. This lady, please.
I was slightly concerned by the emphasis on drawing divisions between generations. It seems to me there's quite a lot of division in our society, and I work with young people, and in the main I have to say they're not criticising the older generations. They've got broader concerns about crumbling communities, about public services which are failing.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could expand on a positive vision that would tie together generations and yet nonetheless also speak to the young.
Yeah, so something I'd just like to add to that recently, which is something that my colleague would point out if he was here, that in the Westminster bubble it's become quite fashionable to like sort of do the kind of pitting of generations, speak in like extremely derogatory and sometimes quite funny terms about older people. This is not how most young people think, you know, like at all. And like sometimes I think we can lose sight of that in our communications and messaging, as I think, sorry, I can't remember who it was, said, you know, we actually don't want to see our grandparents suffering. And sorry, who would like to, also where we should go to this side of the panel. Chris, do you have a view on this? How can we have messaging that brings generations together rather than making it a sort of zero-sum generational game?
Yeah, I think it also sort of ties in with the lad at university. I think that Conservative YIMBY, well, what Labour YIMBY was a ground movement in the Labour Party that turned the policy away from opposing Conservatives' planning reform into the Labour Party. Now, we brought hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people into this organisation across the country. James Euster and Simon Clarke and Alex Balkin have started that with an absolute bang, really. And what that means is, what does that look like? If you're on a university campus, you know, you're not like taking the whip like Tom's touched on there. You know, you can campaign on local issues if you're living in that area, and that could be supporting a housing scheme. It could be getting people, you know, drumming people up who haven't necessarily usually ever been involved in politics, but they might care that, I don't know, the student accommodation's being blocked, and you know that, you know, your student accommodation's gone up last year. And then you can be outriders, right? You can be putting on and thinking about looking at Onward stuff, but also, you know, looking to American Compass and on Cass and all these kind of guys, and have the debates, have the discussions. You can have those respectful, constructive discussions, and it can be maybe bring some people who do think that they can pit generations against each other, and then tackle them, make things interesting. And I think it comes down to, you know, making a leaflet, asking for some money for some beers and pizzas, and just getting people around the room. And ultimately, you know, that's how you can build the movement for the Conservatives, but also selling the vision of like a renewed mission around housing and building things, as Tom's described.
Kai, do you have a view on this in Germany?
Well, we try to, because we have to reform our social welfare system. The contributions are standing now at 42% of your wage, which is shared by the employer and the employee, right. Half-half. And it was a long time just under 40%. That was somehow the consensus that this is the max, but now we are quickly increasing up to 50%, and we find that unsustainable. But the question will be, how do we do it? And of course, it will. I believe that you won't find a solution which puts the burden on just one generation entirely. You have to get everyone on board to make it a consensus in the wider public. Now, this is something each party failed so far. That is a good thing, because there's still a first mover advantage to gain. But it's going to be a real struggle doing that during being in government. because every policy you're proposing is immediately looked into, is it feasible to implement it right away? So we have to be very careful there, but that's the thing we have to do.
Thank you, Kai. We have time for one more question. Can please go to this gentleman here.
Thanks very much. Really interesting and good to see the data as well. I had a question which was really about this, coming back to James's conclusion around competence and how you demonstrate competence, and linking it also to something that other people on the panel have said around people paying attention to the Conservative Party at the moment and relevance. Is there a danger that in saying outlandish things or trying to gain attention, you sort of damage your sort of perception of your competence, and what are sort of broader reflections on how you look competent from opposition?
Can I give that to you, please, Tom?
Look, I think you're right. Yeah, of course there are. Of course there are dangers, which is why, I rather like what Kemi's been setting out. She's trying to be honest, and because the challenge we've got isn't about generational opposition. It's about how do you bring a society together. That's why I said, you've got to care for older people, but it's also, the economic points I was making aren't just rewarding the young. If you want to have a pension going forward, and most people my age, and I'm now approaching the older edge of the spectrum, do want a pension going forward. Of course I do. But you're not going to get it unless you have growth. And the only way you get growth is you get investment. The only way you get investment is you have young people invested in society who are not just fighting over dead money, houses or bonds, but actually seeing live money grow and higher and so on. So yes, you've got to be careful about knee-jerk. Of course you do. You've got to set out reasonable policies. You've got to set out real ideas. You've got to look at things like, the challenge of the fact that the pensions industry is so massively divided that there's rewards for nobody except the market makers. You've got to look at the fact that the investment model is frankly designed for a system of 30, 40 years ago, not for today. And you've got to look at the fact that if we don't get this right, we're really in a very, very serious hole indeed. And so I think if you make sure that you have, that you're honest with people about the challenges that we face, you're honest about the decisions that must be taken and the compromises that balance across generations so that you get a rebuilding of society, not a division of society, then I think you can get yourself in a position where, to the gentleman point over there, frankly, I hope I'm wrong, but in 24 months you may well find that people are looking at 4 different fantasy lands under Labour reform, the Greens and the Liberal Democrats, but the Conservatives will have set out some honest economics and some true future.
Thank you to all of you for coming and participating. It's been a very good discussion. I think we could go on for quite some time if we had the time. Thank you very much to our panellists, Lara, Tom, Kai and Chris, who've been absolutely excellent. And finally, thank you to Cass for working with us on this event and this research. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Monday.